right, welcome to Making Music. I'm Gary Wineroth from Guitar Showcase, and with me is Jack Van Breen from Guitar Showcase. And we're here this week to talk about how to choose an electric guitar. Last week we talked about an acoustic guitar. Today we're going to talk about an electric guitar. Okay, we dispelled some wives' tales last week, and we talked about how you don't have to start with a nylon string guitar. Steel string is okay. Well, now I'm here to tell you that we don't have to start with an acoustic guitar. So an electric guitar is okay. Now this one's just right for me. I think the color goes good with me here. The Hello Kitty is popular for the little girls and some big girls actually. This is a full-size one. They also make this in a 3/4 size one. So that's part of the deal. The point is that one of the wives' tales is that an acoustic guitar is where you have to start. Well, let me tell you, parents, kids don't necessarily want to be there. They don't always want to be there. An electric guitar, by its nature, is easier to play because the strings are closer to the neck. And since they are closer to the neck, it will play without rattling because it's electrified, amplified. You don't hear the rattle. The rattle is actually there, just a little bit, and we can hear it just a little. Plug that guy in, and let's see where we're at. I think it's pretty interesting to see the difference in a lot of these guitars. By the way, that one that Jack was playing as we opened here, we'll talk about in a little bit. That's a 1957 Fender Stratocaster. Okay, so the point is that you don't have to start with an acoustic. You can go with an electric, and in many cases, an electric is actually easier to play. So what can you add to that, Jack?
Well, the other thing is the challenge with any instrument is getting the student to practice. And one of the ways I found as a teacher to get my students to practice was to teach them something they wanted to learn. You know, if you want to teach the student and they want to hear they're not going to practice if you're teaching them. So going with the electric guitar has a higher percentage rate for success with the younger students because they want to rock out.
That's the bottom line.
Simple bottom line.
Okay.
Also, it is easier. We're getting a lot more girls, and as you said, women, because of the Hello Kitty thing. We actually have a friend of mine who plays this guitar in his rock band.
On stage.
His bandmates said, dude, don't do that. No, you're going to make us look bad. But at the end of the third set, the guitar player had all the girls asking for his number. So hey. I leave it there.
So that works. Okay, well, on the electric guitars, as with the acoustic guitars, once again, I'm proud to be an American. USA rules. There is no such thing as a collectible electric guitar, with a very few exceptions of some of the real weird things like a Hofner Beetle bass and a few other little things, but that aren't.
That's the only thing I can think of is the Hofner Beetle bass.
Probably the only one.
It's the Beetle bass.
Everything else is American, and a lot of people actually think Rickenbackers, we should have brought one, are British because the Beatles played them, but they're not. They're an American guitar. Rickenbacker still made in the USA. Fender kind of started it all in the USA, being from California here. Now, what have you got there? Is that an American Stratocaster?
This is the American series. Some call it the American Standard. This is what I like to say current product that is directly delineated from this original 57.
Let me see this guy here. This guitar, this is the one Jack was playing to start with. This particular guitar was played by Ross Valerie of Journey. He's actually the bass player in Journey, but also a singer-songwriter. And singer-songwriters, whether they be drummers, bass players, keyboardists, always have a guitar that they write and play on. And any bass player knows how to play guitar, and generally any guitar player knows how to play bass to some degree. But Ross is very multifaceted, and he played this guitar for years. And it was sold to us as part of the collection that we bought from Herbie Herbert in Cyclops Studio. He was the manager for Journey, and it resides in the Showcase collection. My point is that this is the same guitar, except for color, built in 1957, sold for about $300 with a hard shell case back then, a little less. That this guitar is available, you know, in the same color and everything nowadays. This guitar is worth about $20,000. Whether or not Ross played it, this, you know, that's the fact that this has been refinished diminished its value. The fact that Ross, a superstar, played it, and that it was played in Journey, and that so forth, it makes it worth more money. But as a vintage piece, as a museum piece, in stock condition, it's a $20,000 minimum guitar. These guitars new sell for around $1,000. The point is that from $300 to $20,000, they become heirlooms if you keep them long enough. Now, this is what, almost 50 years.
Yep.
Well, next year it'll be 50 years. So, young
Almost as old as
kids
me.
starting out, my favorite thing to say is that if budget will allow, go with the American Stratocaster. It's the one that started it all. It's the one that I'm sorry to say that I was selling new in the 60s for around $300, and now those are worth $20,000 and $30,000 as well. And I can honestly say they do not have to be in pristine condition either. They can be nicked, scratched, dented, or even look like Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitar, which is pretty torn up, and they're still worth a lot of money.
The interesting thing is that this guitar still retains a lot of that classic tone. Sounds very similar to what I was doing with the Ross Valerie
Absolutely.
guitar, but it's a little quieter, it's a little cleaner. It's actually, for me, a lot easier to play because the frets are a little bit larger than they are in the Ross Valerie. The neck has a little bit flatter shape. It's a 9.5 radius as opposed to 7. These are things that I like and the general populace has. So this is what I like to call state-of-the-art Stratocaster.
That's right. It has been
And-
improved substantially.
And in $1957, this is actually cheaper than that one was.
That's right.
You work a lot
Absolutely
less
true.
to get one of these, and it's going to last for freaking ever.
Yeah, it'll go for a long, long time. Well, yeah, this one's been around 50 years, and it's still happening. And that guitar does sound. Actually, play the with the G deck here, your backup band, and let's hear the same exact thing you were doing.
I need a foot switch.
Yeah, need a foot. Yeah, you can do that. So basically, you've got the same bottom line guitar, and you don't have to spend a fortune to get it. And it is USA made, and it's a good collector's piece for the future.
Yeah, what I found is it takes on a guitar like this about 7 to 8 years, and then it comes back up into what you paid for it. You know, it depreciates immediately a little bit, and then it comes back. It's been a phenomenon. I've studied for, well, I'm not going to say how many years.
40 years, just like me, Jack. Yeah. He's actually old, he just doesn't look like it. So, okay, from there, in the Stratocaster, we go down to
The standard Stratocaster.
standard Stratocaster. Okay.
Now this looks amazingly like the last one I just played, and in fact, there's some very subtle differences. The bridge pieces are actually the original bridge pieces
A lot like
that they
this.
used in the 50s, and there are players. Eric Clapton is one who actually prefers the sound of these
the sound
pieces
of the vintage
as opposed to the cast pieces there. I like the cast pieces. The pickups are slightly different. And the neck is a 21 fret as opposed to a 22 fret as the American series. But they have the exact same tuners. So they have the stay in tune very well.
sealed tuners,
Sealed
die-cast
tuners,
sealed
die-cast
tuners.
tuners.
They're lubricated in there.
The bodies, it's an interesting story. The body blanks are all made in America, and they put them on these big pallets, and then the guys from the custom shop who build the finest solid body guitars in America, sorry, Henry, they come with their tuning forks, and they'll go to the pallet, and there'll be 50 blanks sitting there, and they'll pick one up, and they'll tip it, and they'll go, okay, that's a good one, and they'll put it on their cart, and they'll tag, no, that's not quite good enough, and they'll pick their 10 or 15 bodies and leave 40 bodies there. Then the American guys come along, and they'll just take the next 30 that they need, and they'll leave 20 on that, and those will be shipped to the Ensenada plant where they are finished with the same finish as the American standard, and they're put together. And the point being is that you could get a custom shop body blank because it's the same selection that they do, and they just didn't go that far. They didn't need it.
Right.
The necks are also made in America.
They're a great value. Now, I've been to the Ensenada factory a couple of times, and actually it's an interesting story. The factory burned down some years ago. They had an old factory in Ensenada when they first started there, and the wiring was bad or whatever, and it burned down. And the very next day, Bill Schultz, who was president of Fender, who recently passed away, rest his soul, came out and told all the employees, "You're still on the payroll. We're going to rebuild the factory." They thought they were out of a job, and then about an hour later, they all left, and they came back with wheelbarrows and shovels and started cleaning up the mess. And to make a long story short, they all pitched in, and those that could do plumbing did plumbing, those that could do electrical did electrical, those who could do carpentry did carpentry, etc., masonry. And in 90 days, the factory was up and running with the very same OSHA standards as the American factory, I might add. All the scrubbers, all the dust catchers, everything. Everything was identical from California to Ensenada. It was the same identical looking factory. They just took the same plans and just duplicated it. Now, they make their own pickups in the Mexican factory, and they make their own pickups in the USA factory. And they do have different specifications, and obviously for the more expensive American ones, they do have a higher specification. The bridge pieces and so forth are generally imported and then built and put together down in Mexico. In America, they actually hand finish, bend, and machine each individual metal part. They still use the same presses and things and drills. The jack plate right there is still stamped at the Fender factory. A lot of those, as I say, are imported in mass quantity and then used on the Mexican ones. But the same machine that made this made that for the American guitars.
50 years later.
Yes, yes, and it's amazing to see in the American factory. So there's a lot of handwork that goes into these guitars. Interesting note, as I'm standing there, both at the Mexican factory and the Corona, California factory, they take the necks and they're cut now on a CNC machine and a computer-controlled carving machine, actually, and then later they're sanded. And as we were going through the tour, that one of the guys was explaining what he was doing, and he was sitting here like this, and he went a little too long, and he goes, "Oh, that's going to be a V-neck," and he just did the other side to match, and it turned out, so, generally, you get differences in the necks, and we found that throughout the ages with Fender. You'll still find it. These are hand-finished, these are hand-finished, the American ones are hand-finished. So we go from the Mexican standard Stratocaster to another incarnation, and this particular one is made by Computers Who Care. Okay, now they use different factories in China, Indonesia, Taiwan, India. They've used, different people use different factories. What's it say on the back of that neck? It'll say somewhere there.
This is an Indonesian guitar.
Indonesia, okay.
Plays just like the Korean.
Because of the fact that the computers do care, they do replicate the parts that they're told to replicate in a very predictable way. So for a very low-priced instrument, and again, about $200 street price in a package with an amplifier and all the other goodies, you've got a situation where you have a very playable guitar. Okay, now turn that up a little bit, play that same tune you were doing before. We want to hear it again. Okay, so it does function, and
It sounds very similar.
It sounds very similar. It's not the same. I don't want anybody to think it's the same for the kind of money difference that there is. You're looking at $200 versus around $1,000
Gary, if
versus
you're
around
let
$500 or
me
so.
pick my Christmas bonus, obviously I'm going to go for the 57.
You want the Ross Valerie? Okay.
Only because I'd sell it and then I'd buy me one of these because well, Gary doesn't like me to say it, but my primary Stratocaster was actually assembled in Mexico. And
it's a great guitar. No, that's not a problem there. Okay, now other on the low end, this isn't just about Fender this time. On the other low end guitars, you've got, I see over here, you've got a Dean, Dimebag Darrell. Okay, I don't know if that's even functional. I just pulled it out of the box. You can try it. I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Well,
but the cool thing about this guitar is it comes with a Dimebag Darrell hat and a little amplifier and a case. Okay, you've probably got to tune it. And it's the shape. Poor Dimebag Darrell ended his very untimely demise. One of the only entertainers I know of to be shot and killed on stage, which was a bad way to go. So the bottom line is that his tribute guitar, which this is, could mean a lot to some kids who really appreciated his style of playing.
something like that. We have a little bit different song for that, I think. Or some such.
Very cool.
This works pretty well. For the student that wants to play a more aggressive style of guitar, we call it metal, this would be a good choice. Does come with the amplifier. The amplifier does support headphones, so you parents that don't want a really loud, outrageous sound in the house can give them the headphones. They are limited, so they won't blow their brains out. But,
that's another good point. The electric guitar comes with an amplifier generally in a package, or when you buy an amplifier separately. Most all of them now have a headphone jack. So really, a child can practice with headphones on and make less noise than you would with an acoustic guitar, because it just doesn't sound, all you get is just the string noise, and that might be picked up here by this microphone. But okay, this other one, this is Jackson. This is another kind of a heavy metal guitar. That's kind of narcotic looking too. That's an interesting package. That one comes with a what they call a pocket rocket headphone amplifier. So it doesn't have an amp like this in the box. It has a headphone amp that has effects and all those kinds of things.
And what's really nice is it sounds really good, but it's very portable. You have the guitar in a little bag and the headphone.
And it runs on batteries.
When you go off to grandma's, the kid can bring the piece along, or dad.
Yep.
Dad
It's
wants
cool.
to play it. And this one sounds pretty hip too. Was out of tune.
So again, a more metal,
More
heavy
metal sound.
type.
We should have brought Jeremy.
Should have.
Jeremy's one of my coworkers, and he does the metal like nobody's business.
He loves doing the metal. So that's an interesting kind of a guitar. Basically, that has two pickups. I noticed the other one did too. So what do you do when you switch? When you switch between the pickups, let's hear the difference.
Okay, so with this position here, we're on the neck pickup. It's
Right.
going to be brighter. In this position, we got a little deeper tone. And you can do both, which gives a little bit more bell quality. So there's a lot of versatility in a tone, even with the two pickup guitar. And you can even use the tone control. Fair bit of sustain with this one.
Okay. And then, not to be left out, we brought the famous Gibson Les Paul. Now, I didn't have a chance to grab one today, Jack, but Gibson has an import line called the Epiphone. And the Epiphone Les Paul looks exactly like this for the most part, just as the Stratocaster looks like its American counterpart. And it is in the reasonable price range too, at around a couple $100, and looks, sounds good, and is made in some foreign country. Will never have collector value, but is a good way to start, and they like to think that if you start with their line, that you'll move on up from an Epiphone to a Gibson. Now, this Gibson that you're playing is the quintessential Gibson. This is a '59 reissue, And this particular one is a used guitar, but it's a very good example of that kind of guitar. And more, let's hear it played through your death box here too, with the.
Well, I actually prefer more of a bluesy tone or a jazz thing with this guitar.
Okay, let's hear it.
So you can play some jazz stuff with it. You can play some blues. You can play rock. So it's a very versatile instrument also. Any guitar player that you like, pick them, send me their name, and I'll prove to you they have a Les Paul and a Stratocaster.
Those are the two most popular in the world.
Those are the two.
Those are the two most popular in the world. So even though Les Paul himself was a jazz player back in the old days, first a country player and then later a jazz player, this became the quintessential rock guitar. It really, really is. You know, guys like Guns N' Roses made it famous, and Jimmy Page made it famous, and
Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones had it in his first 3 albums.
absolutely.
The first time I saw one of these was at Winterland back in the 60s. Okay, so I am old. With a guy who started Jimmy Page, not Jimmy Page, I'm sorry, Eric Clapton, Peter Green, Mick Taylor, all played with a gentleman named John Mayall, who was the blues guy in England in the 60s. And I had the extreme good fortune to see him with Mick Taylor at Winterland, just tearing it up. And I spent the rest of the evening walking over to my buddies going, I gotta get one of these. I gotta get one of these. And eventually I did.
Yeah, yeah, and they work. So that's a very cool guitar. So basically, let's hear that one a little bit, and then can we compare like the Strat sound to the Les Paul sound? Because I think a lot of guys come in at Christmas time, especially at Showcase, they ask, what should I get? Should I get a Strat or should I get a Les Paul? Now, a young player obviously isn't going to have the budget for both. So how are we going to answer that question? I'm the buyer. You're the salesman.
It really depends on where your tastes lie. A Les Paul, as you said, Led Zeppelin is, Jimmy Page is known for playing a Les Paul, though he started out with a Telecaster. Clapton played a Les Paul in his early years. Probably one of the most famous Les Paul players in my scope is Duane Allman and Dickie Betts of the Allman Brothers. Or so it's got a good growl to it. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of versatility. I like to play and use these volume controls. So I'm constantly adjusting my tone minutely because I have the 2 pickups I can play against.
Now you've got volume for each pickup, tone for each pickup.
Exactly so. And by blending certain little tones changes, Carlos played Gibsons for years. He was more of an SG man, but he liked that kind of a tone. So you get a lot of different sounds out of the Les Paul. The Les Paul has a slightly shorter scale, so
right,
it's a little bit easier to play.
A little different that way.
And as I said, you're going to have one of each eventually. So if you're leaning more towards the Les Paul, because those are the type of players you like, that's a good way to go. If you're leaning more towards the Stratocaster, and let's use Ross here. You hear right away it's a little bit brighter, more quacky sound, thinner sound. But also has a lot of different sound. You can play.
Lawrence Welk's guitar player used a Stratocaster back in that era, I might add.
You can play jazz, you can play, play country, rock, a lot of metal players. Eddie Van Halen played a Strat for years.
In summary, then, what we should say is that you don't have to start with an acoustic. In fact, an electric is easier to play. So if that's the child's preference, or the player, doesn't have to be a child, it can be an adult, and you're never too old to learn, by the way, then go with an electric. And in fact, with headphones on, it's quieter around the house than an acoustic.
The family will appreciate it.
The family will appreciate it. And basically, it's a little bit easier to play, a little easier on small hands. Selection is about the same, price is about the same, so that's not a consideration. Not an issue as far as anything else goes. So we've got about a minute to go. Let's turn on your band again, and let's...
Yes, this is a very cool piece.
The Fender G-Deck. Let's hear it.
And what's really nice for the student is you don't have to find people to play with.
Turn it up a little and let's...